So, thanks, Meredith. So we'll start with first of all with the let's see, why isn't this going forward? So what is IARPA collaboration? So some of you are new on this. It's a platform for connecting federal agencies and non-federal researchers, Arctic communities ranging from profits, nonprofits, state, federal, international, interested stakeholders about what is happening in the Arctic related to the marine ecosystem. And it does support the U.S. Arctic Research Plan. That was a new version, came out in for the 2022-2026 period. And it's composed of 4 priority areas, which is the half dome you see here in red. So there's a community and resilience priority team. So each one of these little pies has a team. Below it, each one of these are foundational activities, and you can read the 5 different descriptions. They have collaborative teams. And then there's 18 what we call community of practices. And the marine ecosystem community of practices are what we're talking about today. And you can see they range from, we fall under the Arctic system interactions part of that, of IARPIC, but there's community resilience, sustainable economies and livelihoods, and risk management and hazards are some of the key priorities within the U.S. Arctic Research Plan. And then some of these are cross-linked between all the communities of practice, ranging from data management, education. We fit right underneath a lot of the work we do in the marine ecosystem work is in the monitoring, observing, and modeling. We have indigenous directions here, foundational, and also technologies. And I put down on the lower left, that's where you can get to the link to find out more about IARPIC and the what different teams are doing. So within the marine ecosystem, what we call the COP community of practice, we used to be called a collaborative team, but we've modified that in the new 5-year plan. And it's basically to increase our understanding of the structure and function of marine ecosystems. And so we're relating that to within the climate system, and also to develop methods forward for predictive capabilities. And so, as I mentioned, that the work that we do in these webinars or the associated projects relate to the goals and objectives of the U.S. Arctic Research Plan, which will then interface across the international aspects that Lee Cooper will talk about related to the Marine Working Group of the International Arctic Science Committee. And then Anna would have a discussion about Pan-Arctic efforts under our European colleagues, and also for development of a Pan-Arctic observing under the Distributed Biological Observatory. So our team leads, as I mentioned, Kathy Kuhn, Danielle, and then myself. So today's goals, and this was on the agenda on the website, we're going to highlight some of the international projects that are related to Pan-Arctic marine ecosystems, and particularly related to results from the Arctic Science Summit Week with that topic that was held in February 2023 in Vienna. And noticeably that this was, just so you know, oops, let me see, that it was held, it's usually held every year, and next year it'll be in Edinburgh, Scotland. And the whole idea is to bring together multiple international science and programs directed to the Arctic, so we can cross-fertilize it and cross-link some different activities and have everybody in one place for that discussion. So as I mentioned, this focus today is going to be on particularly the priority area 2, which is on the enhancing the ability to observe, understand, predict, and project the Arctic dynamics, the Arctic as a dynamic interconnected system. And we'll have time after each presentation to ask questions of the speaker. And also, we're pretty informal on this. So you can just raise your hand during it, or put information or questions in the chat and bring them forward. And then after the 3 talks, we'll have an open discussion about what we covered, as well as other community updates. So I'll start this now as far as what I'm doing, as far as the highlighted, and I'm just going to make sure I have a little timer going so I don't use all the time, because I do like to talk. To look at marine observational and coordination activities. So this was the Arctic Science Summit Week, as I mentioned, in Vienna. And one of the things you can see the outline of from Friday to the following Friday, there are different meetings related to, there's terrestrial, there's atmospheric, there's social science, different working groups of the International Arctic Science Committee meet, as well as other international groups, and particularly for our effort out on the waters in the Pacific Arctic is directed under the Pacific Arctic Group. And so I started off by giving updates to some of the other groups, and there's a forum of Arctic research operators. And so this is internationally agency folks or international leadership that's directed particularly related to either ships or atmospheric or gliders or various or land-based area facilities that are then shared and exchanged with the different countries at that meeting. So I briefed out on our Pacific Arctic Group, then which is a consortium I'll show you in a minute of the different countries that are involved with a lot of activities in that region, so Alaska, between Alaska and Russia. Then brief out in the Marine Working Group, and Lee will be able to give some overview on that aspect of that meeting as one of the U.S. reps, along with Karen Frey from Clark University. And then we had a community meeting, and Anna will be able to talk about that, and that's part of the DBO, the Distributed Biological Observatory. We also had a session on the Synoptic Arctic Survey, which is part of an international observing effort with multi-ship operations going into the high Arctic. There's also a session on Pan-Arctic observing, as well as a session on improving models and observations. This one is focused on biogeochemistry in Arctic seas. And then we ended up at the final day of the meeting, I led an Arctic panel on future directions in the Arctic and the Anthropocene as a request by the organizers. So just briefly, the Pacific Arctic Group, for those who don't know, it's a consortium of organizations and individuals that have a Pan-Arctic perspective or Pacific perspective. And it is affiliated with IAS, the International Arctic Science Committee, and it serves as a regional partnership and to help coordinate and collaborate on science activities that are mutually of interest. I'm not going to read all of these, but PAG has 5 objectives related to research needs across the Pacific Arctic, coordinating science operations, particularly for the marine operations on ships, to promote the exchange of data and developing integrated databases, exchange information. We do this twice a year during our PAG meetings, and then how to keep and maintain direct contact to other relevant science organizations. The organization is such that we have an executive committee. Jessica Cross is the new chair. Previously, it was held in Canada. I had it way back a decade ago. And then there's vice chairs, and as part of the PAG synthesis activities, these are kind of what their leadership is in that executive committee. So I sit there for the observing, the DBO observing. So we have 2 meetings. We have it in spring during every Arctic Science Summit week, which rotates around countries. And there's usually business focus issues. And then we start talking about the field plans. And then in the fall, we give results from what the field activities were, what accomplishments we can bring forward, and then actually preliminary on what the next field season the following year will be like. So just 3 endorsed projects that we have that are observing the Distributed Biological Observatory. The second one is called the Pacific Arctic Climate Ecosystem Observatory, and then work up in the Chukchi borderlands with multi-ship operations. Same thing as we built at the DBO here is how many vessels were going through the Bering Strait. And the third one is a focus now with the ice retreat on the Central Arctic Ocean more. This is just an example of one cruise, the US cruise in the Synoptic Arctic Survey. So on the DBO, I think many of you know that because I've been talking about this for multiple years during this group. But I just would point out that we have cruises going through that will occupy some or all of, particularly 1 through 5, going into the Arctic, starting off with our Japanese colleagues as well as a US cruise work on the Norseman 2, then working with the Canadian colleagues. Then we have our Korean colleagues on the Aeron. And in September, the Sikuliak work, a NOAA-funded program. And then the Mirai will be coming through with their work, and that's from Japan. And the whole point of this observing system is to do consistent monitoring of biophysical responses to environmental change, be it the seawater temperature increase, sea ice retreat, and what's that having to have an impact on ecosystem response. And this particularly framework is being expanded, and Anna will talk about that into the Pan-Arctic. Just a few examples of what is shown at these meetings, which is the Canada's Three Ocean and the DBO, our Canadian colleagues out on the Sir Wilfrid Laurier as it progresses to go into the Canadian water. These are some of the collections that are made everywhere on the either CTDs for looking at temperature, salinity, zooplankton with bongo nets, and putting floats out in collaboration with other programs. And they run a continuous plankton recorder that allows them to run from Victoria all the way up till we start the real time series studies, in which they're collecting a lot of plankton on this reel, and then they get identified for taxonomy. And then this is our core sampling that you can see here, where we do water column benthic work as part of the DBO, seabird and marine mammal observations into the region. So another example is this is the Canadian led, and also with US, the Beaufort Jai observing system that occurs up in the Canada Basin area. And this is on the Louis S. St. Laurent. And it is funded by the US NSF, the Canadian Department of Fisheries Ocean, with collaborators from Woods Hole and also some of the leads from Yale. And you can see that in 2022, they had their 20th year, and it is funded through 2024, and no doubt will go into a renewal request. And then just to finish off with Canada, since it is of the North American, this is the Amundsen expedition. So all this information is brought forward in country reports during each one of the Pacific Arctic Group meetings, and the data results as highlights are brought forward by the different countries. Another example is these are our Korean colleagues, and this is just the 12 years that they've been running sampling, including DBO, and then up here in the Pakio region, doing time series observations and process studies up in the Chukchi borderland. And you can see the timeline here from 210 to 222. Number of stations that you see has been expanded over the years, and then the period of time, usually in the August period that they go out. And then our Japanese colleagues, similarly, this is the 215 at the 224. You can see there the work as they come in, including some of the observing collections as the DBO, and then working up into the slope and in the borderland area. And then another example of observing is the International Synoptic Arctic Survey. And this is just one example from the Healy. This was going to the North Pole, where we were up there looking at particularly physical drivers, the carbon component, and the ecosystem response. And this was just the end of what was a 2-year program where we had like the Odin or the Nansen Legacy, the Norwegian ship, the Japanese, the Korean ships, vessels, the Canadian going into the basin and building and sharing data. And we're having just so you all, an open workshop and symposium in June at Woods Hole this year. Briefly, we looked over just 1, 2, I'm not going to go through all this, 3, 4, 5, but we started off in Dutch Harbor and Rand here, did some high resolution work, reoccupied lines that were done 20 years ago on different programs, proceeded to the North Pole and came back here on the western side of the Mendeleev Ridge, and then did some work, put a final station in here on the observing system as we pass through Bering Strait. The International Pan-Arctic Wind Networks, they expand from the left, and Anna will talk about this for the DBO, and then the right, just to show you the number of countries that are involved with the Synoptic Arctic Survey, and a couple of websites. You can see these both in the PowerPoint that's posted on the website. A couple other points before I close up on this is the fact that we have an early career proposal and the funding for the Mirai in 2023. So bringing early career scientists as a foci on that cruise, and some of the members that have proposed from different countries. There was a call put forward, various 8 countries submitted, proposals were accepted, and the early career scientists were notified. And this is something that is being brought forward by Japan to be continued through their Arctic observing on their new icebreaker they're bringing forward. And I think Lee might have a few words to say about this. But this is there's going to be a workshop in November to talk about the international use of this platform for observing activities. So finally, I'd just like to say the working group, this is Libby Lagerwell as part of the Pisces ICES working group. So this is looking at the integrated ecosystem assessment for the Northern Bering and Chukchi Sea. So Elizabeth Lagerwell is part of is the lead on this, along with a co-lead, Yuri Zuenko. And the activities we're running for the last couple of years, they're putting together conceptual models for the region, doing synthesis on data, and they're putting together peer-reviewed publications. They're also including Indigenous modeling development and working with coastal communities on that as a product for the integrated ecosystem assessment for the Northern Bering and Chukchi Sea. So I guess this is my final point. We did end up the Arctic Science Summit Week with a panel. We talked about, they were directed on what future directions could be into the Arctic, and we had panelists, including from the social sciences, as well as from the physical sciences, and an overview from Heidi Cassens about the work that has been done in the high Arctic and moving forward with collaborative activities. And then I would just conclude, there are lots of national to international research implementation plans, and you can see them from the Arctic Research Plan that I spoke about earlier. There's implementation plans for the United Nations Decade of Ocean Sciences for Sustainable Development. At the same time, with the Circumpolar Inuit protocols for equitable and ethical engagement in Arctic science. So these all play into the international collaborations that are relevant to our collaborative, community of practice. So with that, I would just say that if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them. I'll stop sharing here, or we can take them at the end. Thank you. So I don't see if there's anything in the chat, if anybody has any questions, but otherwise we can move forward.
Danielle has a question.
Yes, Danielle.
Thanks, Jackie. The session that you just mentioned that you chaired on the Arctic and the Anthropocene and what's needed in as far as future research, is there a summary report that you can share about the highlights that came out of that conversation?
Yeah, that's a good point. I had multiple slides in my panel presentation I put together. There were topics throughout the week, and the answer is yes, but I don't know that that report is out yet. I think there was a recording made of it, but I'll find out and send a note out to everybody to give an update on that.
Thanks.
Yeah. Anybody else? Okay, then why don't we go ahead and Lee, do you want to take it for the talking about the IAS Marine Working Group?
Okay, let me get my little thing up. Okay, looks like I'm there. I want to give a little bit of a kind of an outtake of what was accomplished in Vienna at the most recent Arctic Science Summit Week that involves marine research. Myself and Karen Frey, who's at Clark University, are the two U.S. representatives to the Marine Working Group of the International Arctic Science Committee. And I think actually I got my first slide is us, so you can see what we look like. But we're the representatives serving the U.S. community and trying to bring forward international cooperation and coordination efforts within IASC. And so we attend these meetings that are held annually, and also we have meetings by Zoom, and I'll show you some of the other activities that are involved in this brief presentation. I might add that I've been on the working group for quite a while, and I'm supposed to be replaced. And the Polar Research Board is the one that makes the nominations and selection process. So I don't have anything to do with it, but from what I understand, I should be rotating off and have served for the maximum number of years that you're supposed to be allowed to. Let me just give a little bit of an outline about all of us that serve as appointees to the 5 working groups. It's Marine Working Group, Atmospheric, Terrestrial, Cryosphere, and a Social and Human Working Group. There are 2 U.S. scientists appointed to each of these working groups, so there are 10 of us that are involved. Matthew Druckenmiller is the lead U.S. delegate to IAS, so he's an additional person. He's the representative of the United States on the IAS Council, and he's a vice president of IAS in addition to serving in the U.S. Role. And so he's very important in the whole process. We do have a self-forming, I don't know whether they're not collaborative groups anymore, community of practice. That's the U.S. Forum for the International Arctic Science Committee that's run through IARPC collaborations. So we can post things there. It seems to be sort of episodic in terms of the information we provide. If you go to the IASC website, all of the U.S. representatives are identified, and we can be directly contacted if there are concerns or things that we could bring forward. So again, our main goal is doing strategic planning for internationally coordinated Arctic research. We have a little bit of money we work with each year that we make decisions at the annual Arctic Science Summit Week to kind of seed programs. And actually Mosaic, for example, started as a project that was funded by working groups of IASC. So from a little acorn, big things can grow, I guess is the lesson to be learned from that. Some of the other things we've done is hold smaller group meetings as well as Zoom meetings. This is one we held in November 22 to sort of align what we're doing. We were asked to come up with a new Marine MWG as Marine Working Group strategic plan. And we've got other parallel things going on, particularly the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, as well as ICARP, which is the International Conference in Arctic Research Planning, the 4th version of this. So every decade, these get revised as to what the important things are that we ought to be concentrating international cooperation and research. And so we've got in this meeting, we worked on developing this diagram and thinking about how we implement these processes: disturbance, connectivity, borealization, marine life, sea ice and stratification, and what the key questions are, and harmonizing that with some of the goals of the UN Decade, the challenges as well as the research challenges. So this is the sort of activity that we're involved with as working group members. And I'm proud to say now we have a new strategic plan for IASC, and the Marine Working Group has the longest series of questions. We're twice the length of all the other working groups, and in terms of identifying, so those things that were spelled out on the prior diagram, the marine life, sea ice, and stratification, rather than going through a laundry list of, well, we need marine geology, we want this, we decided to go a thematic approach. And it's probably difficult to read this on the screen, but we're making this PowerPoint available so you can do that or go download the strategic plan for IASC. Is we asked a bunch of questions that are centered, the things that are unresolved that will help us understand change in the Arctic under each one of these thematic ways of looking at the Arctic and how it's changing and what strategically needs to be looked at for new research initiatives. So another thing we do is seed these small projects. We had 30,000 euros available in 2023, and it varies a little bit depending on how much money gets spent the prior year and whether people successfully spend everything. But in this case, we had about 30,000 euros to spend and decide on proposals. About 40% of the money, or there is a minimum of 40% that must be spent on what are called cross-cutting proposals. So these are things that are transdisciplinary, that are also funded by other working groups. And the funding must be generally spent by the next Arctic Science Summit week. So any money we give out, plan to spend it in that year, and then we make those final decisions at the ASSW each year. So in Vienna, we made that, and I got in line to continue a project we'd had in the past, which was enabling early career scientists and or indigenous participation on foreign country international ships. And so I did this with Takashi Kikuchi of Japan this year, because as Jackie mentioned, the Mirai has opened up berthing spaces on their ship. And so there's an opportunity for international scientists, particularly early career scientists, to get on board. And we'd hope eventually to also engage with indigenous knowledge holders and put them on these vessels also. So just to give you an idea, this is just simply a continuation of a program we've already successfully tried. Jackie mentioned the Synoptic Arctic Survey cruise. So we had a young German scientist, Jona Silberberg, who joined us on the Healy for that 2-month cruise last fall, and supported. So the U.S. provided a berth space on the Healy, and her travel was supported by Marine Working Group funds. So you probably get the idea. This is not a huge amount of money. Typically, 4 or 5, 6 thousand euros are for each individual project is what gets supported. And this was simply a slide I put in that I used in my own presentation. You have to sell this to your fellow working group members, but essentially how we would do this project this year in terms of paying for travel. And if there was a COVID quarantine issue, that we would take care of that too in the budget that was put together. And in this year, in 2023, we're emphasizing the JAMSTEC cruise aboard the Mirai, and hope to do this in the future and maybe expand it. So what other kinds of things are funded? These are the cross-cutting proposals that the Marine Working Group decided to help support. You can see that a lot of these are kind of workshops or projects that help get new projects started. So they were not a funding organization of and by ourselves, but help to bring together people from different countries. And so these are all discussed. The proposals are reviewed and ranked, and we go forward at the meeting where we did in Vienna to decide which ones to fund. So these are the cross-cutting ones, and these are the ones that solely related to work that the Marine Working Group would support. So didn't involve atmosphere, cryosphere, terrestrial, social and human working group. And you can see the second one is the one that Takashi and I put together. And there was another one. The third one was a Norwegian scientist proposed, but it's to help develop DBO type observatories at the Atlantic and in Baffin Bay and elsewhere besides the one we already have in the Bering Strait region. And so there's some funding available to get early career scientists to that to help. And actually the ASOF workshop, which is being held in the Canary Islands this month, also those funds will support a small number of early career scientists and give them some exposure to that important meeting too. So that's my last slide. I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Lee. Does anybody have any questions right now for Lee about the IAS Marine Working Group? I don't, because I know about it, but if you do think about things, you can put it into the chat box. But you also have Zoom call meetings, right? It's not just
we do, and there are 23 countries that are members of IASC. So it's, if there is interest, it's a great opportunity to meet scientists, not only in the marine realm, but also working in terrestrial systems and indigenous communities, and all kinds of mix of people show up at the Arctic Science Summit Week. So it's a neat meeting to go to and plan some time and money to attend.
All right, thank you, Lee. And I would just point out that 2024 ASSW is in Edinburgh, Scotland, but the 2025 is in Boulder, Colorado. So that's one in the US that would be, and it's going to be a culmination of the what's called the International Conference on Arctic Research Planning 4. So there's a lot of science thought process going over the next 2 years about where to go forward in Arctic science and socioeconomic issues also. All right, so thank you, Lee. And now, Anna, do you want Nikolopoulos, if I say it right, and you're ready to give us an update on the Pan-Arctic DBO development?
Yeah, I will also do the exercise of sharing. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, at least. No, no, maybe.
There you go. Yes, looks good.
Maybe some lag. Oh yeah, I'll
No,
just put,
it's good.
no, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I didn't mean to go forward. I just wanted the laser. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I will show a couple of slides on what we talked about at the summit week on the theme of the Pan-Arctic Distributed Biological Observatory, as it said. And yeah, I shouldn't forget to introduce myself perhaps again. So I'm working at the Norwegian Polar Institute in Tromsø, Norway, within the Arctic Passion Project, which is a EU Horizon project until alive from 2021 to 2025. And we have the task within one of the work packages to try to establish a DBO on the Atlantic side of the Arctic Ocean. And it's only one of the many tasks within the huge project. And I should point out that the Arctic Passion Project is also a land, including land, terrestrial science and ocean science. So we try to make a system out of all the systems. But that is a whole story by itself. I will actually focus on this map, which is the reason why we met up and will be meeting up in the future as well to try to find good ways to coordinate among us and ourselves also as both regional sectors, but also as a Pan-Arctic entity, which we hope will grow there. And what you see on the map is, of course, you recognize, although it's not the entire DBO I see now, but the DBO Pacific. In the Pacific sector, you know, you're familiar with the stations, the regular stations taking there, and now for more than a decade. And also the Davis-Ray Baffin Bay area that also have beautiful time series and hard efforts to maintain the regularity in the time series over there. But lately we have emerged then as newcomers in the DBO network in the Atlantic sector, which is sort of what I work with, but also in the East Siberian Sea, which you perhaps already have heard about or are connected to, since they are an initiative mainly driven by the neighbors consortia, the IARC and University of Alaska Fairbanks, and also the Korean Polar Institute, Research Polar Institute. And you see the main context there, and that has emerged lately also and is in the making. But then us in the Atlantic sector falling under the Arctic Passion umbrella. And it's Arild Sundfjord here at the Norwegian Polar Institute, and me, and also Marit Rigstad, that you perhaps have met or heard of, now leading the Nansen Legacy project here in Norway from the University of Tromsø, that are the main leads. But I should point out that, of course, all these groups and the newcomers as old ones depend on many more colleagues than that to put it all together. Yeah, so I shouldn't, well, yeah, we can come back to the map because, of course, it's a beautiful idea, and we sort of cover all the gateways in now as it seems, in the Arctic Ocean, perhaps a little empty on the Canadian archipelago side over here. But it also, we're different levels of maturity in these systems, of course, and also different types of environments that needs to be covered. That makes it a bit complex, of course, to to harmonize completely, so to speak. And also this is quite a simplistic map. I should point out also that both the Atlantic sector and the East Siberian Sea sector builds on already established time series in stations, but I just tried to remove some of the buzz, because there has been almost 3 decades of activity in monitoring some particular repetitive sections over here, and also a long history in the neighbors network over in the eastern side. So there are existing time series, but we, at least us in the Atlantic sector, need to sort of simplify these and take the work collectively on the skeleton of all our national time series that we do have. So that is also a little bit different. I mean, there are many nations in the Pacific sector as well, of course, but yeah, there are different traditions in the approach of how the monitoring has been established until now. Also, for you that aren't that familiar perhaps with this area, is that the main players, although we of course are many nationalities, but the main players traditionally have been Germany, Norway, and Poland, that actually are very big in these repetitive surveys through the years. Again, this is only a selection of those. But for going back to what we actually talked about in the summit week, we decided to go full throttle and have a community meeting that was actually the most part of the Monday of February 20th, where we had the different types of discussions, both in a Pan-Arctic joint context, and I think those were the ones that worked the best. But I squeezed in some regional workshop time also, but they were maybe a little bit too squeezed in time and maybe not as fruitful as meeting up with a Pan-Arctic crowd as we did. And we had just a mixture of sort of landscape setting presentations. You can see here on the list presenting the DBOs themselves. All 4 were represented in the agenda, and also some of the related projects. And also these, the information here can be also found in the ADBO website and also the DBO websites, as you had the links before in Jackie's talk. We wanted to see how far, you know, they have the first buzz. We met actually in 2022 in Tromsø as well, but then it was mainly the Pacific and the Atlantic DBOs that were maybe doing having the most of the crowd. But we wanted to continue the discussion of common priorities, opportunities, how we would like to shape this framework to include the Pan-Arctic setting. And many good ideas, and not too many rigid decisions for now, but many things to work ahead on, of course. And yeah, among those were, as you can see here, how we stimulate the sort of the scientific assessments, but also what kind of mechanisms we would like to have to increase collaborations, and everything from, you know, science questions to the practices that we use, how much we should harmonize these. We would like to have a little bit of chaos still, or, you know, not too rudimentary procedures so that it gets difficult, but it should be, you know, flexible to evolve with time and the questions we want to pose, but still so that we can share data among us without too much trouble understanding what we have been doing. And we talked about all these things. But also, yeah, so we also had this second day was the crescendo of it all with the science session, which was really nice to get into scientific talks. We had 3 keynote speakers and some talks from the different regions, and also, as you can see here in the photo, including panel. with a lovely discussion on things to think of ahead. And he was our keynote speakers, including Paul Wassman, that we happened to get hold of in the very last minute to share his vast knowledge about the ecosystem sciences in the Arctic. And things that we talked about were, for example, what I've been putting here on the list, but much more than that, of course, but how we highlight the similarities and differences between our regions, and we connect to strengthen not necessarily only similarities, but actually also being able to compare where different, for example. But it's important to decipher those things and connect where we think it would leverage our science. And we talked on the stories to be told for us to firsthand learn more, but of course, what do we need and want to turn into decisions, and what are the urgent matters to bring ahead, so to speak. And also, again, what I've been mentioning, the various level of maturity between the DBOs, but we shouldn't forget that we already have, all these regions have very long time series that we can start working with until the rookie side of the Arctic Ocean will catch up with the DBO routine. So we hope to start up the true collaboration very soon. And also mention perhaps that beyond the scientific questions per se, which are of course the core of it all, we should identify common data format needs or routines. Oh, sorry, yeah, that's an unfinished sentence. Routines to secure swift metadata sharing and data sharing, and that we sort of understand what we are doing on either side. So yes, so we will keep all the thoughts, work on them another year, and it's already time to plan the next summit in Edinburgh, although that will probably be a little bit smaller because we don't have the scientific symposium that year. But I would also, Jackie had a beautiful list of all the activities related, and also point out that there was some of us participating also in a discussion early on in the summit week in an effort from the Global Ocean Observing System to build a regional alliance for the Arctic. Nowadays, we have something that is called Arctic RUSE, which is under the European Regional Alliance within this establishment. I won't have time to explain too many things, but I wanted to just point it up that there are other groups working, or we are actually included in that group also, working on trying to rearrange a little bit about in these GOOS alliances, for not making it also so European in that sense, that we have something that is more pure pan-Arctic that we can connect to. And we are taking part in this. For example, Craig Lee from UW is one of the leading persons in the initiative. So we are trying also to occupy the task team that has been formed lately to monitor the interests of, for example, the DBOs, so that we see where, if this is formed in the end, because this is only a suggestion to try to advance and develop the idea of having this. And it's also, I should say that it's also a process that is envisioned to be a bit parallel with the ocean decay, and meaning it takes some years to get there. It's not happening extremely soon. But we have the task team with action plans for the coming 18 months. So still there will be some progress in this until the next summit week. And as I said, we are trying to not let DBO go in this whole Pan-Arctic perspective. So the last few things are, I guess, the next steps. We are already started planning the next coming week, and we are happy to have received funding for the early career scientists and indigenous peoples or local knowledge holders participation also in that meeting or the DBO regional autumn meetings. So there is some more funding than earlier to for a few representatives. The call will be planned and arranged shortly. And also the Siberian DBO workshop is to be held this very soon, next week, at Corpi in person. I don't really have any connections or website address to that, but as you can see, they are writing a white paper, as far as I understand, on how to structure this, and we'll discuss further than at the in-person workshop. Jackie, maybe you have some more information that you can share on that also. And we, on our side, will put these key site stations, that we call them, in practice for our network. And in short, these are, I mean, we have the transects and standard stations sort of pinpointed on our for our network, but in these deep waters, it's also quite hard to ask opportunistic or plan campaigns to take all the transect stations. So we already have those national programs doing that, but we have at least worked on a layout of this network to focus on some key sites. Well, quite many, but they all are representative of various environments in our gateway area. And this is the first field season that we are sending off the seagoers, different cruises of mainly Norway, Germany, Sweden is out there currently, and Italian vessels will also visit, in Danish maybe over here on the Greenland side. So there are quite many campaigns that we hopefully then get to opportunistically, this time at least, sample some of these key sites. So we're working on these metadata, collecting the metadata after all the campaigns, and we will also then have that as basis for our autumn workshop. We're mimicking the Pacific DBO annual routine, so we're trying to meet up late in the autumn to discuss the happenings of the earlier season or the current season, and also plan ahead a little bit for next season. And we just decided to have an in-person meeting in Sopot, Poland, hosted by IOPAN by the end of November. I guess it's fairly concurrent with maybe any DBO autumn practices. And yes, and just as the last part, also we are taking part in this task team for the Arctic GRA, as we call it in short, from the Goose Umbrella Initiative, and try to establish this even further, and especially getting into the true science and planning of scientific assessments ahead. All right, I took a lot of time. Sorry about that. But
no, you're fine. That's fine. Does anybody have any questions for Anna? We might de-share your slides so everybody can see their faces.
Yes, sorry, I de-share.
No, you're fine on that. Okay. No, I'm always happy to see with new things that came out of the recent meetings for that SOPOT meeting. That's great on that. But they will be going in the field just like the Pacific side will going. The update is that there's some of us that are going to Copri for this meeting. I am actually going and Lee's going there too, but I'll be giving a seminar on early career science during it. It is going to be hybrid. And so I need to find out about the link. I can make that, find out how broad they want to have that information, but there'll definitely be a report that comes out of that in their planning activities at the Siberian DBO.
Perfect that you're going, actually. Yeah, because it's in the Arctic Passion General Assembly Week, so we couldn't
Right.
really, but maybe we pitch in a little bit also if it's hybrid, maybe we can listen into some of the sessions.
Yeah, that would be great. I'll be checking out the agenda right after this meeting. Okay, are there any comments or questions related to this? Otherwise, we have a few minutes left for any other community updates. But first, are there any questions for Anna specifically? I don't see any in the chat, but they'll be able to see this on your talk on the website. Any community update comments for this as we close out the webinar? I would just say oceans. Oh, yes, go ahead, Danielle.
Hey, I just wanted to share that the North Pacific Research Board met recently to talk about the timeline for our future Northern Bering Sea focused integrated ecosystem research program. And so we'll have more information about the results of that discussion on our website soon. But I wanted to let you know to keep an eye on our website. We anticipate releasing a call for pre-proposals in October of this year. And we anticipate the deadline for those pre-proposals in around May of 2024. And then something that's really exciting is that when full proposals are invited, the board will make awards of up to $10,000 available to those teams that have been invited to submit a full proposal to allow them to further develop that proposal with Indigenous co-investigators. And pre-proposals that are Indigenous led will be able to use those funds to seek co-investigators in Western science. So keep an eye on our website, and I should have more details that I can share during our June meeting. And I wanted to mention, please join us next month. We'll have some presentations about ongoing Arctic synthesis projects as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. That's good, real nice information that you had. And I'm glad you mentioned about the June call, but we're right at the top of 3 o'clock. Does anybody else have any updates or comments they want to provide? Otherwise, I'm going to close the meeting and wish you all a nice rest of your afternoon, evening, or to bedtime.
It looks like Wes came off mute.
Huh?
Hey, hi Jackie. I'm Wes Moses. Of course, I know you, but I don't think I've met a few others here. So I'm at the Naval Research Lab. I've been involved in a few projects looking at the remote sensing of coastal Arctic waters. And I just wanted to mention that we are thinking of starting up a new project looking at melt ponds on sea ice. And so focusing on the Beaufort Sea region, but I'm open to other areas as well. So if this project moves forward, we'll be looking to collecting or doing some field work in 2025 and 2026. The idea is to use hyperspectral optical as well as radar data to look at melt pond evolution. So I just wanted to throw it out, and I'm also looking to see if there's any information on any other planned activities by others interested in melt ponds and so on. I'll be keen to know about it and to see to look for opportunities for any collaborations.
Oh, well, welcome. And that's great news. And I think that there is a community practice for the sea ice group. And so we oftentimes have crossover. I know there are people like Karen Frey and others doing optical work. And so I think make sure your name is on the list, and so we can build some collaborations there, be some information exchange.
All right, thank you.
Great, thanks. All right, so if anybody else have any other comments, otherwise we're going to close.
Well,
Lee,
I'll just follow on to his comment. I've been working with a group from the University of Dayton on sea ice melt ponds, looking at predictive modeling using machine learning. And I'm just the consultant on the project, but Ivan Sudakov's a mathematician, and they're funded not through polar programs, but through the physics part of NSF. So I'd be happy to talk a little bit about what we're doing. I think I have a Zoom call with them tomorrow. So it's good to hear what you're up to.
Thank you, Lee. I'd be glad to get any information that you could share.
Okay. Well, thank you all very much for the time that you put in. Thank you to the speakers and Lee and the updates that we received. And I wish you the rest of a nice day. See you next
Thank you
month.
too
Bye-bye.
Bye.
for yeah.